Dad, if you lay a hand on me tonight, it'll be the last time you ever get to call me your daughter. The words burned in my mouth, sharper than the taste of the champagne bubbles still clinging to my tongue. I hadn't planned to say it, but it came out anyway, right there, in the middle of crystal chandeliers casting rainbows on polished floors. The smell of vanilla candles swirling around guests who had no idea the party they were toasting was seconds from collapse. My name is Madison Carter. I'm 28, born and raised in Boston. I've got the kind of stubborn streak people either admire or call a character flaw. Depends who you ask. I'm standing here at the Ocean Crest Resort in Cape Cod, where the ocean hammers the cliffs so hard. The windows rattle like nervous hearts. This night is supposed to be my engagement party. The night Ethan and I announced to the world that we're finally getting married. I'm wearing a dress the color of crushed rubies, hair pinned into soft curls, makeup done so precisely it could survive a hurricane. From across the ballroom, Ethan catches my eye, 6'2", navy suit that hugs his broad shoulders, his dark eyes tracing my every move. He's the only reason I'm still standing upright. He mouths, "You okay over the string quartet playing some old Sinatra tune?" I nod, a lie wrapped in red lipstick. The truth is, I'm not okay. Because behind every smile in this room, there's a tension so thick I swear I can smell it. Donna and Charles Carter. My parents are working the room like political candidates, flashing perfect teeth, whispering secrets to Boston's elite. My brother Brandon stands near the dessert table, one hand gripping a glass of bourbon, the other slung around the delicate waist of his fiancée, Sophia Blake. Sophia, the heiress with a last name heavy enough to open any door in the city. Blonde hair, green eyes, a family that practically owns half the skyline. Tonight should be about me and Ethan, about planning the life we want. But it's not since 2 weeks ago. When my parents sat me down in our living room, the sun slanting through the blinds like prison bars. "Madison," my father said, voice smooth as glass, "your brother deserves a wedding worthy of the Blakes. We need you to help make that happen." My mother nodded, tears already brimming, as if the act of crying would make her demands feel like love. They wanted my trust fund, $150,000 my grandfather left me, meant for my wedding, my future, my escape hatch, if life went sideways. But suddenly, my future was negotiable. So Brandon could have chandeliers dripping in crystals and a reception where caviar practically rained from the ceiling. I told them no, and from that moment on, I became the villain of the Carter family saga. Standing here tonight, I feel it in the way my father glances at me, eyes like cold steel, in the way my mother's voice trembles as she introduces me to distant cousins, as though my mere presence might infect the evening. Even Brandon can't meet my eyes. The guests keep laughing, toasting, swirling their drinks, oblivious to the storm that's brewing right here in this ballroom. But I'm done pretending. Because the girl who used to bow her head and swallow her rage, she's gone. And tonight might be the night my family learns exactly who they've been underestimating all along. It was a Tuesday night when it all cracked open. I'd barely kicked off my heels when my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "Come home. We need to talk. Important." The word important from Donna Carter was usually code for, "We're about to guilt you into something." I drove across town, the Boston skyline, a glittering blade against the dark sky, and found myself back in the living room of my childhood home, the one on Parkside Avenue with the polished hardwood floors and the faint scent of lemon polish clinging to every surface. Charles sat in his leather chair, hands steepled under his chin, looking like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Donna hovered beside him, twisting her wedding ring round and round on her finger. I dropped my purse on the couch and crossed my arms. "What's going on?" Donna's voice cracked as she spoke. "Maddie, we need to talk about your brother's wedding." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly where this was headed. Charles cleared his throat. Brandon and Sophia are getting married in 4 weeks. Sophia's parents are expecting a high-profile event. Brandon wants the reception at the Grand Harbor Hotel. You know how these things go. I stared at him. And, he said, voice dropping into that low rumble he saved for moments when he wanted to remind me who was boss. Your brother is over budget. He needs help. I let out a humorless laugh. Let me guess. You want my help. Donna reached out like she might touch my arm. But I stepped back. It's not just about the money. Sweetheart, she pleaded. This wedding, it's the biggest moment of Brandon's life. It could open doors for him, for all of us. The Blakes have connections you can't imagine. I shook my head. So you want me to fork over my wedding fund, just so Brandon can have fireworks and a 5-tier cake? Charles slammed a palm against the arm of his chair. This isn't about cake. It's about family, about loyalty. You've always been the practical one. Madison, you can have a lovely small wedding with Ethan. Backyard weddings are very in style these days. The dismissiveness in his tone made me see red. Are you hearing yourself right now? I shot back. I've been planning my future for years. That money is the only safety net I have if things fall apart. I'm not blowing it so Brandon can impress a bunch of people who won't even remember my name next month. Donna sniffed, her eyes shining with tears. Please, honey, don't be selfish. We've done so much for you. We paid for college, for your first car. We've given you everything. I felt the pressure building in my chest. And I've worked my ass off to be independent, to not need you. And now you're trying to drag me back in like I'm some teenager who has to say yes because I owe you my entire existence. Charles leaned forward, voice ice cold. Without us, you'd have nothing. We're not asking you to give it away. We're asking you to lend it. Family helps family. A bitter laugh tore out of my throat. Family helps family. You mean, like, how you stood there while Dad slapped me in public? Or how you've spent 2 weeks pretending that never happened? Donna's face blanched. That was a moment of temper. Your father was under stress. Stress doesn't explain why you just stood there, I hissed. Why you let him humiliate me. Charles's nostrils flared. You're blowing this out of proportion. Oh, really? I snapped, because it felt pretty damn proportionate when his hand hit my face. The room pulsed with silence. Donna collapsed onto the couch, sobbing into her palms. Charles just sat there, shaking his head like I was some problem he couldn't solve. You're going to regret this. Madison, he said finally, you're going to regret tearing this family apart over a few dollars. It's not a few dollars. I shot back. It's my future. And for once, I'm choosing me. I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving my parents behind in that house that suddenly felt colder than winter. For the next 2 weeks, the silence was brutal. Donna texted daily with lines like, your father's blood pressure is sky high. Is that what you want? Brandon is devastated. He says you're ruining his wedding. Everyone is talking about your attitude. People are worried about you. I blocked her number. Charles left me voicemails growling that I was disrespectful and a disgrace. Brandon never called. He didn't have to. At Sunday dinner, he just sat there glaring at me, tossing out snide remarks like, not everyone has to settle for a charity worker's paycheck. It was poison. Every meal, every glance. Ethan tried to keep me steady, but each time I looked at the people who raised me, all I saw were strangers willing to trade my entire future for a few hours of glitter and applause. And deep in my chest, a fire was starting. One I knew I'd either have to smother or let burn the entire Carter legacy to ashes. The first sign that the night was about to implode was the hush that fell over the ballroom. It rippled through the crowd like a shockwave, silencing conversations mid-sentence. That's when I turned and saw Brandon swaggering in through the double doors. His tie was crooked, his hair mussed like he'd just run his hands through it 50 times. and the smell of expensive bourbon clung to him like cheap aftershave. Sophia trailed behind him, clutching her clutch bag so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Brandon paused just inside the doorway, scanning the room as if he owned it. When his eyes landed on me, he smirked. Ethan stiffened beside me. I felt a spike of adrenaline, because I just knew that Brandon hadn't shown up to celebrate my engagement. He'd come to finish what our parents started. Brandon raised his glass. To my sister, the one who decided her own wedding wasn't as important as mine. A few people gasped. Someone let out a nervous laugh. I felt Ethan tense, the muscles in his forearm tightening where his hand rested against my back. Brandon wove through the crowd, slurring slightly, bumping into a woman in sequins who shot him a look of pure disgust. When he reached me, he leaned in, voice low. Seriously, Maddie, why are you even here? Shouldn't you be off counting your little nonprofit pennies? The entire circle of guests went still, hanging on every word. I tried to push past him, but he blocked my way, his grin sharp as a blade. You think you're better than us now. Huh, Brandon sneered. Because you work with poor people, because you didn't cave when Mom and Dad asked you for help. Guess what? Princess, you're still a Carter. And Carters don't turn their backs on family. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could speak, Charles was there. He appeared out of nowhere, like a storm front rolling in, suit jacket flaring behind him. Madison, we need to talk, now. I stared at him, disbelief pulsing through my veins. Dad, not here. Now. His voice was steel. Ethan stepped forward. Sir, with all due respect, you should calm down. But Charles shoved him hard in the chest, making him stagger back into a table stacked with tiny desserts. Glasses rattled. Someone shrieked. Stay out of this! Charles roared. The music cut off mid-song, leaving an unnatural silence hanging over the room. All eyes were on us. My heart slammed against my ribs. Charles grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin. You ungrateful girl, he hissed. You owe this family. Everything you are, everything you have. We gave it to you. And this party, you don't deserve any of it. My voice shook as I tried to pull free. Dad, let go. No, he shouted. You're embarrassing us in front of everyone. You're a selfish brat who can't see past her own worthless career. Brandon's wedding matters. Our family name matters. And if you think you're walking out of here with that trust fund untouched... And then it happened. Charles pulled back his hand and struck me across the face. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the ballroom. Pain exploded across my cheek. My head snapped sideways. My earring flew off, skittering across the marble like a piece of shrapnel. A collective gasp rolled through the room, as sharp and cold as shattered glass. When I looked back at my father, all I saw was rage. Not a trace of the man who used to lift me onto his shoulders to watch fireworks at Boston Common. Donna rushed forward, grabbing Charles's arm, whispering frantically, Charles! Stop! Please! But he shook her off, still panting, eyes wild. Brandon stood frozen, mouth open, color drained from his face. Ethan darted in, pulling me behind him, voice shaking with fury. You just hit your daughter on her engagement night. Charles didn't even blink. She brought it on herself, he spat. She's tearing this family apart. She thinks she's better than all of us. My hand went to my cheek, the skin burning hot under my palm. The room blurred. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. Phones lifted, screens glowing as people recorded the scene. I felt nausea rising in my throat. I took a deep breath, forcing the words out between clenched teeth. You know what, Dad? You're right. I'm done pretending. I turned to Ethan. Let's go. Ethan didn't even hesitate. He wrapped his arm around me, shielding me from the sea of stunned faces. We pushed through the murmuring crowd, past the half-eaten cake and bouquets of white lilies. Donna called out my name, her voice cracking like glass. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit my skin like a slap of reality. The music hadn't resumed. The hush from inside followed us all the way to the valet stand. And for the first time in my life, I felt something snap free inside me. I wasn't sure yet what that meant. But I knew this. I wasn't going to let them write my story anymore. The night after the engagement party, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of our apartment in Boston, while the city hummed quietly beyond the glass. The bruise on my cheek throbbed with every beat of my heart. Ethan slept beside me, his arm draped across my waist like he was trying to hold me together, even in his dreams. But I couldn't close my eyes. Because every time I blinked, I saw my father's face twisted in fury, the crack of his palm still echoing in my ears. At 4 a.m, I slipped out of bed, the wooden floor cold under my bare feet. I padded to the living room and pulled the small fireproof lockbox from the highest shelf of the closet. My fingers hesitated over the combination, my breath fogging in the chilly air. Then I twisted the dial. The lid creaked open. Inside was a folder I hadn't looked at in 8 years. I laid it across the coffee table, the cream paper still crisp as the day my grandfather handed it to me. I could almost hear his voice. Blood is family. Maddie, but paper is protection. When I flipped the folder open, my entire world shifted. There, in neat legal print, was the deed to 26 Parkside Avenue, the house I'd grown up in. The house my parents were still living in. Title holder Madison Carter. I blinked hard, rereading it 3 times, waiting for the letters to rearrange themselves into something less insane. But they didn't. My grandfather had transferred the house to me before he died. Quietly, cleanly. He'd left my parents living there without telling them the truth, because somewhere deep down, he'd known. Knew what my family might become if pushed. I dropped onto the couch, one hand pressed to my forehead. My father, raging at me about loyalty and sacrifice, all while living under my roof. My stomach turned. A moment later, Ethan shuffled into the living room, hair tousled, rubbing his eyes. "Hey, what are you doing up?" I didn't answer. I just pushed the folder toward him. He flipped through it, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. "Holy shit, Maddie, this is real." "Yeah." He exhaled a long, low breath. "They have no idea. None." We sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Ethan spoke. "What do you want to do?" I stared at the document like it might bite me. I'm going to remind them who they're dealing with. But even as I said it, a darker thought coiled through me. Brandon, standing there in that ballroom, drunk and smirking, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. A chill skated down my spine. I whispered, "There's more. Ethan, I can feel it." He tilted his head. "More how?" I chewed my lip, struggling to explain the storm of half-formed suspicions swirling in my chest. Brandon's been living bigger than even a surgeon's salary should allow. New cars, trips to Miami, custom suits, and the way he looked at me at the engagement party, like he wanted me to explode, like he wanted a scene. Ethan frowned. Maybe he's just a narcissist. He is a narcissist, but I think he's hiding something huge. And I think my parents are covering for him. Ethan stared at me, silent. So I told him everything. About the whispers I'd heard 2 years ago at a charity gala, hushed conversations about missing hospital donations. About how Brandon's name had come up in connection to creative accounting. I'd brushed it off at the time, desperate to keep the peace. But now, it felt like pieces clicking into place. Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. "Maddie, if he's stealing from a hospital charity, that's federal prison-level shit." "I know." He swallowed. "And your parents, if they're helping cover it up?" My throat felt like sandpaper. "Then they're accomplices." Ethan sat back, rubbing his jaw. "Are you sure you want to open this door?" I met his gaze, heat rising in my chest. "They opened it the second my father hit me, the second they chose Brandon's wedding over my entire future." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then let's burn it all down. The next morning, I called Samantha Ortiz, my lawyer, a woman who wore power suits like battle armor and had a reputation for making grown men weep on the witness stand. "Sam, it's Madison," I said when she picked up. "I need to know exactly what Brandon's been doing with his hospital charity work. And I need to initiate legal steps regarding the house on Parkside Avenue." Samantha didn't even skip a beat. "Understood. I'll dig in and call you tonight." Hours later, she sent me files, and what I saw in those documents made my blood run cold. Wire transfers from hospital charity funds, thousands upon thousands of dollars, funneled into shell companies registered in Brandon's name. Luxury condos in Miami, casino payments, jewelry purchases, and on several forms, my parents' signatures. They'd been covering for him, using fake consulting contracts, lying to protect the perfect Carter family image. I sat there, staring at those pages until my vision blurred. It wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about fraud, betrayal, the destruction of everything my family pretended to stand for. Ethan squeezed my hand. "What now?" I swallowed hard. "Now. They're going to learn what it feels like to lose everything." The day the letters went out, Boston felt sharper somehow, the air crisper, the sky a harder blue, as if the entire city was bracing for impact. I sat at my kitchen table, stacks of papers spread before me, the golden morning sunlight slanting across columns of legal language and official seals. Samantha had delivered everything I'd asked for, all the evidence, all the necessary forms, every line meticulously documented. And today, the Carter family's reckoning would begin. I signed the last page with a firm stroke of my pen. Then I slid the letters into creamy envelopes, each embossed with my name in small, elegant gold print. I carried them myself to the mailbox on the corner, my heels clicking against the pavement like a war drum. When the envelopes disappeared into the blue metal slot, the door thudded shut behind them. It sounded final. The first letter went to Charles and Donna Carter. It politely informed them that ownership of 26 Parkside Avenue was under review, and that they were officially notified of my intention to reassess the property's status. No threats, no insults, just the cold formality of law. But I knew they'd read between the lines. The second letter was addressed to Brandon, a formal notice of pending legal action, accompanied by documentation of the charity funds he'd siphoned off and the shell corporations tied to his name. It stated that federal authorities would be notified unless he cooperated fully and immediately. By the time I returned home, my phone was already vibrating nonstop. I ignored every call, until my mother's name flashed across the screen. I exhaled, then answered. Her voice exploded into my ear, sharp enough to cut glass. "What the hell is this, Madison?" I closed my eyes, keeping my tone even. "It's a notice about the house, Mom, and a legal notice for Brandon. I thought you deserved a heads up." "You can't do this," she shrieked. "This is our home and your brother is a criminal." I cut in, my voice low. "And you and Dad helped him." Donna sputtered, her words stumbling over themselves. "How can you talk to me like this? I'm your mother." "You stood there while your husband hit me in front of half the city." "Mom," I said, my voice trembling. "And you've been trying to steal my future ever since. Don't talk to me about family." Her voice dropped to a vicious hiss. "You're destroying us. Your father is sick over this. He's not sleeping. He's barely eating. Are you trying to kill him?" I felt my fingernails digging crescents into my palm. "I'm trying to survive him." She went silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "You'll regret this, Madison. You'll be alone. You'll have no one." A bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. "I already do, Mom, except for Ethan. And that's enough." I hung up before she could say another word. Moments later, Charles called. I let it ring, because if I heard his voice right now, I might not be able to keep from screaming. Instead, I sat down beside Ethan on the couch, exhaustion washing over me like a wave. He wrapped his arm around me, pressing a kiss to my hair. "Proud of you," he murmured. I rested my head on his shoulder. "I feel like I'm ripping my own skin off." He squeezed my hand. "That's what breaking cycles feels like. Ugly as hell. But it's how you get free." That night, Samantha texted me. FBI Financial Crimes Unit just confirmed they'll be opening an investigation into Brandon's accounts. Stay strong. I stared at the message for a full minute, my pulse roaring in my ears. Ethan read over my shoulder, his voice soft but firm. "Are you ready for this?" I swallowed hard. "I'm terrified." "Good," he said. "Means you're doing something worth fighting for." The next morning, my phone lit up again. This time, it was Brandon. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Madison, what the hell are you trying to pull?" "I'm trying to stop you from stealing from dying kids," I snapped. He made a strangled sound. "You have no idea how business works. You think you're some hero, but you're just a little girl playing grown-up." I could almost picture his sneer, the same one he'd worn at my engagement party. "Funny," I said, "because I'm the one who owns the house you're about to see your parents evicted from, and I'm the one who's going to watch you get hauled into court in a suit that's suddenly 2 sizes too big." "Don't do this," he hissed. "Think of Mom and Dad. Think of the family name. Think of the kids whose surgery bills you stole," I shot back. He fell silent. Then he whispered, so low I could barely hear, "They'll hate you forever." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Then I guess forever's going to be a lot quieter than it used to be. And I hung up. For the first time in weeks, I felt the scales beginning to balance. Not out of revenge, but because some debts finally deserved to come due. The Grand Harbor Hotel sparkled like a jewel box under the winter sun, the icy wind rattling the flags along the rooftop. Brandon and Sophia's wedding day. I stood outside the main ballroom, the sound of an orchestra drifting through the polished doors, the scent of roses and candle wax seeping into the hallway. I adjusted the crimson jumpsuit hugging my curves. A deliberate choice instead of a dress. A statement. Ethan smoothed a loose curl back from my face, his fingers gentle against my skin. "You sure you want to do this?" I exhaled slowly. "I have to." He nodded once, squeezing my hand. "Then let's go." We stepped into the ballroom, and I swear the entire place seemed to freeze the moment people realized I'd arrived. A ripple of murmurs rolled across the tables. Women in floor-length gowns leaned toward each other, whispering behind manicured hands. Men turned their heads, eyes flicking over my outfit, then darting away when I met their gaze. Charles was there, stiff in a black tuxedo, jaw clenched so tight, a vein bulged in his neck. Donna stood beside him, pale as milk, her lips trembling as she whispered frantic apologies to some of Sophia's aunts. And Brandon, my brother, stood on the far side of the ballroom, basking in the glow of camera flashes. Sophia was at his side, radiant in a gown of silver lace, though the tight set of her mouth gave her away. When Brandon finally spotted me, his smile faltered, and something dark flickered in his eyes. He drained his champagne flute in 2 gulps and passed it to a passing waiter. Ethan and I moved through the crowd, the music swelling around us. People parted like water, unsure whether to greet me or pretend I didn't exist. Then, without warning, Sophia broke away from Brandon and intercepted me near the ice sculpture shaped like a swan. "Madison," she said, her voice low, brittle. "Can we talk?" I blinked, surprised. Of course. She pulled me into a quiet corridor off the main room. As soon as we were alone, Sophia's composure cracked. Her eyes glittered with unshed tears. "I saw the papers you sent Brandon," she whispered. "I know what he did." I felt my eyebrows lift. "You believe me?" Sophia let out a shaky breath. I should have seen it sooner. The late-night calls, the excuses, the trips to Miami. But I didn't want to ruin everything. Our families. There's so much money tied up in this wedding. Her voice cracked. And now I'm stuck marrying a man I barely recognize. I stared at her. stunned by how vulnerable she suddenly seemed. She drew closer, her green eyes blazing. "Listen to me. I'm not letting him touch my trust fund. I've already locked it down with my lawyer. But if you're going after him legally, I want in. I'll testify. Whatever you need." A chill shot through me. "Sophia, that could destroy your family." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "It's already destroyed. At least I'd get to walk away knowing I helped stop him." For a moment, I just stared at her. This woman, once just a symbol of Boston high society, was now an ally I'd never expected. Sophia wiped her eyes and forced a trembling smile. "Go do what you came here to do." And she slipped back into the ballroom, her spine straight as a steel rod. When I re-entered, the ceremony was already beginning. Brandon stood at the altar, fidgeting with his cufflinks, glancing around nervously. The officiant droned on about love and unity, while guests dabbed their eyes with linen napkins. Sophia glided down the aisle, her face a flawless mask. As they exchanged vows, Brandon stumbled over a line, sweat beading along his hairline. Sophia spoke hers in a voice like ice. When the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, the applause was hesitant, scattered. At the reception, Brandon made a beeline for me, jaw tight. A drink, already sloshing in his glass. He hissed, "What the hell are you doing here?" "Madison." I tilted my head, enjoying the party. Why nervous? He leaned in, lowering his voice. "I swear to God, if you don't drop this, you're going to regret it." I smiled sweetly. Funny, because I was about to say the same thing to you. His nostrils flared. "Mom and Dad are begging me to fix this. You're humiliating them. They humiliated themselves." I shot back. "When Dad hit me. When they tried to steal my future for your big circus. And when they helped you steal from sick kids." He looked around wildly, checking if anyone was listening. "Keep your voice down." I leaned closer until my lips were nearly at his ear. "Check your inbox when you get back from your honeymoon. There's a subpoena waiting. Oh, and you might want to tell Mom and Dad to start packing." Brandon's eyes widened, the blood draining from his face. "You can't do this." "I already did." I turned and walked away, the music swelling around me, my heels echoing on the marble like a judge's gavel. Behind me, I heard a glass shatter as it slipped from Brandon's shaking hand, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally standing in my own power. The days after the wedding felt like waking up in a different universe. Boston was still. Boston, the same honking taxis, the same smell of roasted chestnuts drifting through the streets. But everything about my life felt shifted. Brandon's face was plastered across news sites and local TV segments, the words "fraud investigation" scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Reporters camped outside the hospital where he used to work, shoving microphones in the faces of his colleagues, asking how the golden boy of cardiac surgery could have stolen money meant for sick children. My parents tried to spin the story. Donna told the extended family that I'd fabricated the whole thing out of spite. Charles claimed it was all a misunderstanding and insisted everything would be fine once the family talked some sense into Madison. But the paper trail was ironclad. The bank transfers, the shell companies, the evidence of my parents' signatures on fraudulent contracts. No matter how many tears Donna shed, or how many times Charles tried to bark orders at the lawyers, the facts didn't care about the Carter family name. One cold November morning, I stood on the sidewalk outside 26 Parkside Avenue as a moving truck idled at the curb. Men in blue uniforms carried boxes out of the house I'd grown up in. The same house where I'd taken my first steps, where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where my mother used to tuck me in at night whispering, "We'll always protect you." Donna stood on the porch in a long wool coat, sobbing into a monogrammed handkerchief. Charles stood behind her, arms crossed, his jaw set in stone, his eyes avoiding mine completely. The bright red notice taped to the door read, "Property sold. Vacate immediately." Charles finally stepped forward, voice shaking with rage. "You think this is justice? Madison, destroying your family, leaving your mother homeless. You've lost your mind. I held his stare, though my throat felt raw. You lost this house the day you decided your son's wedding mattered more than your daughter's life. The day you hit me in front of everyone we know. Donna cried harder. We gave you everything. I clenched my fists at my sides. No. You gave me trauma wrapped in pretty ribbons. And now you're paying for what you did. Charles's face twisted. You're going to regret this. You'll be alone forever. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. Maybe. But at least I'll finally be free. I turned my back and didn't look over my shoulder as the movers loaded the last box into the truck. That night, Ethan and I sat in our tiny kitchen, the glow from the city lights flickering across the ceiling. He poured me a glass of red wine, then wrapped both hands around mine. How do you feel? He asked. I stared into the dark swirl of the wine. Like I've been ripped open and sewn back together. Like I'm missing pieces I didn't even know were gone. Ethan brushed my hair behind my ear. You did the right thing. A single tear slipped down my cheek. So why does it feel like I'm grieving? Because you are, he said softly. You're grieving the idea of the family you wanted them to be, not the one they actually were. I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I just kept my head down, they'd finally love me for me. Turns out, all they loved was what they could get from me. Ethan tilted my chin up. Madison, you didn't destroy your family. You exposed what was already broken. My chest constricted, a sob catching in my throat. He kissed me gently, his lips lingering on mine. You're not alone, he whispered. You've got me, and a future that's yours. No strings, no debts. I nodded, the tears falling faster now. I just wish it didn't hurt so much. That's how you know you're still human, he murmured. And that's what makes you stronger than any of them. I pressed my forehead to his, breathing in his warmth. Because he was right. I'd lost my parents. I'd lost my brother. But I'd finally gained myself. And even though my heart felt bruised and battered, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the woman I saw in the mirror, because she was the one who'd stood up and refused to stay silent. 3 months later, I stood on a stage beneath blinding white lights, the Boston skyline stretching like a million diamonds beyond the glass walls behind me. The room was packed city officials, nonprofit leaders, local reporters scribbling notes, and rows of women staring up at me with eyes full of quiet hope. I smoothed my hands over the microphone, the cool metal grounding me. My name is Madison Carter, I said, my voice echoing through the hush. And I used to think that family meant safety, that blood meant loyalty, that love meant sacrifice even when it cost you everything. A murmur rustled through the audience. But sometimes the people who share your blood are the very ones who break you open. I swallowed, feeling my chest tighten as the words left my lips. 3 months ago, my father slapped me across the face in front of 50 people at my engagement party because I refused to fund my brother's lavish wedding. For years before that, I kept silent. I convinced myself that swallowing my pride was the price I had to pay for peace. But silence isn't peace. Silence is a slow poison that teaches you your pain doesn't matter, that your dreams come second, that your worth can be bartered away. A woman near the front row covered her mouth, eyes shining with tears. I took a deep breath. After that night, I discovered that my brother, the same one my parents wanted me to sacrifice my future for, had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from a hospital charity. And my parents helped him cover it up. They called me disloyal for speaking the truth. They called me selfish for choosing my own future over theirs. And for a long time, I believed them. I paused, my eyes scanning the faces before me. But here's what I know now. My voice grew stronger. We are not required to bleed ourselves dry for people who refuse to see our humanity. We don't owe anyone our silence, and we are not obligated to save those who keep trying to drown us. A soft ripple of applause spread through the room. I felt my throat tighten. I sold my parents' house, the house they tried to use as leverage over me. And with that money, I built this. I gestured around me, at the soaring glass windows and bright banners hanging from the ceiling. Second Chance House. A shelter and empowerment center for women who've been betrayed by the very people they trusted most. It stands on the same land where my childhood home once stood, because I believe that what was once a place of pain can become a place of rebirth. The applause rose, stronger now, as if the crowd itself was exhaling a breath it had been holding for years. I waited for it to settle, then leaned closer to the mic. Some people think my story is about revenge. It's not. It's about reclamation. It's about building something out of the ashes. I thought I'd feel nothing but triumph. But the truth is, I still miss the version of my parents I wish existed. I grieve the family I wanted them to be. But grief and freedom can live side by side. And sometimes, letting go is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Silence fell again, deep and reverent. Then someone in the back stood up and started clapping, and the entire room erupted into thunderous applause. As I stepped off the stage, I felt a tap on my arm. A young woman stood there, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, tears glistening on her cheeks. Madison, your story saved me. My dad has been trying to make me give up my savings to pay off my brother's debts. I thought I was being cruel for saying no. But now, I know I'm not crazy. I felt emotion swell in my chest. I reached out and squeezed her hands. You're not cruel. You're brave. And you deserve to keep what's yours. She let out a shaky laugh, tears spilling over. I feel like I can breathe for the first time in months. I pulled her into a hug, feeling her shoulders shake against me. When we pulled back, she wiped her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I said softly. "Go live your life, and don't let anyone tell you what you're worth." Later that night, Ethan and I stood on the rooftop terrace, the city lights glittering all around us. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, pressing a kiss to my temple. "You know, I'm pretty sure you're the strongest woman I've ever met." I smiled, leaning back against his chest. Strong doesn't mean I'm not scared. I know, that's why it's real. We stood there a long time, breathing in the cold air, the sound of laughter and music drifting up from the streets below. And I thought about everything I'd lost, and everything I'd found. About how it's possible to grieve and still be grateful. About how family isn't just the people who share your blood, but the people who help you become more of who you really are. And as Ethan held me tighter, I whispered into the night, "We are not what they did to us. We are what we choose to build from it." And finally, I felt free.